From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We have a great show with you today. Folks, we have Tom Smith. Many of you, probably most of you, voted for him. You may not even have realized it. Tom is the Republican nominee for the Court of Criminal Appeals. I don't think many of us even understood what the CCA, the Court of Criminal Appeals, did until about 3.5 years ago when they barred the Attorney General's office from prosecuting illegal fraudulent voting. So a DA in Texas said, hey, come and help us, Attorney General. We've got fraudulent elections here. Attorney General's office did, and then it was litigated up in the Republican court, the highest court in the land, for criminal issues and also more constitutional issues than I understood. Said, nope, Paxton, you don't have that power. So last cycle, 2.5 years ago, 3 of those judges lost in their primaries, and then Tom Smith just won the runoff after 4 people ran for an open seat. Tom Smith is with us today, got 700,000 votes, very strong candidate. We're also talking about China and the effect it's having on America, showing in the UK and also in Texas. You know, we shut down their consulate. Governor Abbott's come out and said there's Chinese spies and operators harassing Americans and Texans in the last 6 months. I mean, I bet few of you knew that. I didn't. And we're going to talk about Mike Pence, and the Cornyn, Pence kind of Bush moderate movement, suggesting that Republicans have lost their way. Well, yes, I agree. Those Republicans who held power for 25 plus years. And then we're going to transition from that into Talarico. And this cabal of moderate Republicans from D.C. attacking Ken Paxton, particularly now that he is our nominee. It's a binary event between Paxton and Talarico. And I don't think people understand just how radical and just how crazy some of Talarico's viewpoints are. So that's what we're going to talk about. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you're following us across all social media. All of these shows are converted into podcasts. In fact, there's often more contact in the podcast. Follow us on Spotify, get the podcast, all the 40 shows or so. We've had A.G. Paxton, Dawn Buckingham, many of the statewides, and probably more than half of them at least that were on the ballot. We're on Apple, we're on YouTube, all the podcasts, and follow us at politicsforthebigdogs.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Many of you are regular listeners know we have a segment often called Tepper Time. Carl Tepper, a state representative who's gotten over $1 million from TLR, kind of a moderate guy from the Lubbock area, go along, get along, has complained to folks, suggesting that the audience, you may not know that I'm a lawyer. Yes, I'm a lawyer, went to UT. In fact, I have an LLM in antitrust. I do a lot of trucking litigation. I used to have a CDL, was empowered to drive these 18-wheelers, so it's an area of expertise that I have. For those of you who may not know, and just to satisfy the kind of whiny Teppers of the world, yes, Anthony Holm is a lawyer, and I go to trial, and I'm 53 years old, and I've been a lawyer for 20 plus years. So any of you who didn't know that, yes, I do deeper dives on the courts and the laws and the drafted legislation because I think it helps us. So that's my requisite wave to the whiners of the world who suggest that this show is causing them grief in their communities because they're being outed as not conservative or exposed for voting for bad bills. Yes, Anthony is a lawyer.
Love what you're hearing? Find all of our shows at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Subscribe to our newsletter and send in your questions. politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks, if you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have a big dog with us today, Tom Smith, who just had a resounding victory in the Republican runoff, 700,000 plus votes. Many of you may not still fully understand what the CCA, the Criminal Court of Appeals, does in Texas. So let's have a visit with Tom, hear about the court, hear about his background, both the primary and the runoff, and the general ahead. So thank you for joining us, Tom.
Anthony, good to be with you. Appreciate it.
And folks, I want a disclaimer here. Tom and I have known each other, I'm not sure how long, 15 years. I think probably when you were general counsel to then Senator Paxton. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
All right. Well, you just had a big victory, 700,000 plus votes. Let's start with your background. Tell us who you are.
Sure. So, what I would tell people on a campaign trail, I kind of start there. people are familiar with the story of J.D. Vance and where he grew up in Appalachia and the book he wrote, Hillbilly Elegy. I grew up about 110 miles from where J.D. grew up, in the same part of southern Ohio. Is actually probably a worse part of Ohio than where J.D. even grew up. And so a lot of the things that he wrote about, we saw that in our family, not necessarily personally, but we saw it around our community. It was a pretty poor area of the state. And so, I talked a lot about my mom and dad and their upbringing. My mom was a public school teacher. My dad actually worked in the oil and gas fields in Pennsylvania and Ohio, built the house that I grew up in, got to be the first person to graduate from law school, and then went to work as a law clerk for the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Thomas Moyer, who was Chief Justice there for 24 years. Great conservative judge, very well known. Actually, all across the country, was a good friend with William Rehnquist, really good friends. Learned a ton from him, and then moved to Texas. Went to work for Jones Day. Worked there for a few years. Got some good training there, and actually worked there when Megyn Kelly worked there, which was interesting. But I never left public service and my interest in government politics. And then got connected to then Representative Paxton when he was in the Texas House. Came on board to be his general counsel when he was in the Texas Senate, and then moved over to the Attorney General's office after he was elected. Worked in a variety of capacities for him the last 5 as a special assistant AG for criminal justice, and then ultimately decided to run for this court because I thought that this is a court that it's one of only 2 of its kind in the country. And I felt like it had gotten out of its lane in a number of ways, not just in terms of decision making, but also administratively. Not a lot of people would know that this court has a 500-day backlog from the time cases are briefed until decisions are made. And so 10 years ago, that was 180 days. And so now it's almost tripled. And that's something that I think the 3 judges that got elected 2 years ago are working on fixing, but they needed more help. And so ultimately, I decided to run because, I think Texans are finding out a little bit more about this court each year, each election cycle, but they needed to know more. And I thought that my perspective on the court could be valuable in terms of making it better.
I'm sure it will, and I'm sure you will make it better. So I want to jump into that, but before I do, I want to flag a couple things for the listeners. Similar to the regular listeners, this is kind of similar to Tepper time. Tom and I overlapped. I worked part-time at a senior level with Tom at the Attorney General's office. So I don't want to fail to say that. We've known each other 12, 15 years, but we also overlapped there at the AG's office. And then separately, which if we've talked about this prior, then I just don't remember it. I was born in rural Iowa. My people are from hard scrabble, no population, no opportunity, western Iowa. When I read Hillbilly Elegy, which is a word I still can't hardly say, I had to look it up. I remember when I got the book. I know who gave it to me, Trabolsi, and I was just crying on an airplane reading it because finally somebody who got it, I had no idea there was more than one fork. I think I was in my 20s, and I'm like, what? What is? I was so intimidated by a table setting. I had no idea. I just didn't. I froze. I just 100% froze. So to be the first one to go to law school and the first one to drive the train in a material. Now, your mama was a teacher. That's a big deal. Your dad worked hard. They launched you. But it's different to be a guy who's made it in Texas, and now 700,000 Texans just voted for you in the runoff. That's incredible, Tom. I'm so proud of you.
It's pretty awesome. Thank you.
Let's talk about this court, because I still don't think people understand it. I'm appalled at the 500-day backlog. Just tragic. That happens a lot of places. I live in Hayes County. When I try to move cases in Hayes County, it takes years to get a civil hearing. Really tragic situation. But look, you're going to do it better justice than I will, but about 3 years ago, maybe even 4, we had the big chaotic event with the Court of Criminal Appeals, which made all of us realize who they were, what they did. Can you fill us in on that? Because I bet you were working at the AGs at the time, right?
Yeah, sure. So the court got a lot of attention for a ruling that it made that the Attorney General's office lacked the constitutional authority to prosecute election-related crimes in the state of Texas. And that case originated out of Jefferson County. It was actually, the indictment came down through Chambers County because the case got presented over there. That's when our office was asked to come and be involved in it. But that's the decision that they made. And several things about that, Anthony, that I think people should be aware of is that.
Hold on. I'm going to interrupt you because I want you to lay this out, but I want to make sure our listeners who are not lawyers are following the whole thing. So,
correct.
So it came out of Beaumont, right?
Correct.
That's the area of Texas. And it was election fraud was the charge. And as I understand it, and you stop me, you're not going to embarrass me. You stop and correct us. The listeners deserve to have this accurately laid out. My understanding, as I recall, is that any district attorney in Texas can seek out the attorney general's interaction in a criminal case. Is that an accurate statement?
That's correct. Yes. Okay.
And they did. Some some DA, it sounds like Chambers County, where it was prosecuted, said, hey, Attorney General's office, Chambers is contiguous to Beaumont area, and said, please help us prosecute what we believe is election fraud. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And then the Texas highest criminal court, CCA, Court of Criminal Appeals, said, no, Attorney General, the highest enforcement agent in the state of Texas, you don't have the legal authority to prosecute election fraud. Is that correct?
That's correct. And in the process, they overturned a 71-year-old statute that the legislature had passed authorizing the AG to do just that.
Oh my gosh. Okay, time out. That's everything, right? So the legislature 71 years ago said, hey, Attorney General, go and make sure there's no fraud and you prosecute. Now, it may require a DA to bring you in. I think that's an open question. But nonetheless, 70 plus years ago, you go do this. And the Criminal Court of Appeals, who I presume were all Republicans, yes?
Yes.
They said, no, AG, we're going to strip you of that power.
That's correct. And they overturned the statute that the legislature passed in the early 50s.
and Paxton and others last go round 2 years ago wiped out, what, 3 of them?
There were 3 incumbents that were defeated 2 years ago following that ruling. And, one of the things that I think it's important to know, your listeners to know, is that, we elect our judges here in Texas at every level. And so judges can be accountable to the voters just as legislators can, executive office holders as well. And I think what the voters did 2 years ago was a message that they didn't agree with what the court did in that particular case, and maybe some other things too.
So listeners, a little sidebar. We've talked about this before. The vast majority of our judges are elected, and this is a great example of why we should keep them elected. More and more, there's been a movement to have appointments by the governor. And Abbott would probably make pretty good appointments, but at some point we might end up with a Democrat governor or a bad Republican who wouldn't. So more and more, I believe we ought to ensure that there's no more stripping us of our right to elect our judges, because when they make a bad ruling like this, 3 of them got knocked out in the primaries last go. The seat that you're running for, I believe the fellow saw the writing on the wall and elected not to run again. Is that right? He stood down?
Yeah, he decided to go run for chief judge of the 4th District in San Antonio rather than run statewide again.
So he went down to a lower court. Okay, I've interrupted you in your flow, but let's go back to that, and then I want to make sure, because you were in a 4-way primary in March, and then you just blew the doors off in the runoff. I want to make sure we also hit that. So pick it up if you can.
Yeah, sure. So actually, the Stevens case, the election fraud case, is a good place to pick that up because these statewide judicial races are not large budget races. So to be able to run them, you have to commit to getting around the state as much as you possibly can. And I kind of saw my role as part of that to A, do that, but B, when I went and talked to voters, to tell them what the court was doing and let them decide how they want the court to look like after the election. So I did talk a lot about that case. One thing that I think, Anthony, your listeners would be interested in knowing is that when the court made that ruling, they ruled that only local DAs could prosecute election-related crimes, but they didn't send the case back to Beaumont to have it investigated. They just dismissed it. And then they came up on a rehearing again. They had another chance to actually do that and follow the logic of their own opinion, and they just dismissed it again. And so that's the kind of thing I would tell people when I went out. I'm like, look, you can agree with the court, what the court did, or you can disagree with what the court did, but that's an important fact for people to know. And then I talked about some other things that the court has done. People need to know that this is a constitutional law court as much as it is a criminal law court. And the most consequential decisions they make deal often with constitutional law, just as that case did. There were some other cases that they've dealt with that we can dive into. But it seemed like the more gravity, the more important decisions they would make that were based on constitutional law, they were making decisions that were really questionable. And this is an all Republican court. And I don't think Texans expect this out of their highest court that deals with criminal law matters and constitutional law matters. And then in terms of the campaign, I started running last June, and I eventually, I had one opponent at the time, then drew a couple others. And I just decided, I'm going to run as hard as I can, and I'm going to get around the state as much as I possibly can and meet with Republican voters and commit to doing that all the way through the finish line. I don't know how many counties I ended up going to, but the more that I did that, the more I saw how people were interested in listening to finding out what this court was all about. Now I figured with 3 opponents, I'd be in a runoff. So I focused heavily on Dallas, the DFW area, and Houston to start, kind of build that base of support there, because all 3 of my opponents were in the Central Texas area. And then after the runoff happened, I started working on Central Texas and and I came to find that, I had a lot of opportunity there, and we just kind of kept building on the base of support that I already had, and it worked out really well.
If you happen to know, and I'm sorry that I didn't go and look before you came on here, how many counties? There are 254 counties. How many did you take?
246.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah.
To 8. Now,
yeah.
and the runoff, don't let me put words in your mouth. Again, correct me when I'm wrong. As I see it, it was you and another attorney who had been on the court as a senior lawyer for like 10 or 12 years. She kind of represented the establishment wing of the court. Let's continue doing what we were doing, independent of the 3 people who were defeated in the primary last time, versus time to turn the page. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment. She's worked with the court for several years, and I think she was sort of there wasn't an incumbent in the race, but she was the closest thing to it. So, and so there are very distinct differences there. And she's a great person to talk to, talented lawyer, and, Anthony, I wish that this had been a race where, we could have had some really good debates about what do you want out of your Court of Criminal Appeals at this time, because there are 2 very distinct views of that. And for the longest time, she insisted on giving me 0 credit for my 30 years of legal experience and saying that I had no experience, no qualifications to be on this court. And I just listened to it for about 6 months, and, we got through the runoff or the primary, and she was still doing it. And I thought, okay, now she's being really partisan about it. So, decided to talk about her experience a little bit, which is not conservative at all. It wasn't conservative at all. And very, very little Republican Party involvement. And this is a Republican Party primary runoff, right? And I think judicial candidates should have Republican Party experience. And so we talked a lot about that. And I think, in the end, by the way, her campaign was out on social media before the primary asking Democrats to come vote in the primary. And to me, as someone that's been involved in the Republican Party for a long time, that's offensive. Nobody should be doing that, let alone a statewide candidate. And I think that really cost her. And it, probably should have, because nobody should be doing that in any race, let alone a statewide candidate.
It may have not been as direct. I didn't see your social media that you're referencing of this woman, but Senator Cornyn did something very similar in the runoff. He said, hey, there's 18 million Texans registered who didn't vote. Come and vote in the runoff. I mean, that's about as close to saying, Democrats, please come support me as you can.
Right.
And look, people outside of Texas kind of, they thumb their nose almost at and recoil that we elect our judges, or certainly at a statement like, if you're going to be a judge, a Republican nominee, you ought to be associated with the party in some way, shape, or form, right? But yeah, that's our system here. We nominate a Republican standard bearer, and they nominate a Democrat, and then we go. So I couldn't agree more, and you are a very strong conservative and associated with the party and the movement for a long time. Yeah, I'm glad. Expose it. It's just crazy.
And I think that matters. I towards the end of the campaign, I started thinking, I'm like, it may actually matter more that judicial candidates have some Republican Party or conservative credentials, because all you ever hear from a lot of people running for judge is their legal resume. Well, let me tell you something. Everybody running for judge is going to have a really good legal resume. They are. Almost everybody, if not everybody. So you have to, if you're voting a Republican Party primary for judge, whatever level, I don't care what it is, you need to show that this is what my Republican Party involvement in. These are my conservative credentials, so people will know you actually have a conservative judicial philosophy while you're on the bench. I mean, we've been let down so many times at the federal level with appointments that have gone haywire or south. And by the way, my boss was my old boss in Ohio was on the short list when David Souter was nominated. And
oh my goodness. Can you imagine?
He would have been a so much better judge, right? And so in light of those things, I think, and especially in the times we live in, they're so dangerous. I think it's even more important that judicial candidates, have some conservative credentials that they can present to voters and say, here's what I've done for the party. Here's what I've done for conservative politics.
And look, voters are starting to pay attention to both our high courts. Hallelujah. Because the Texas Supreme Court, they're all in theory conservative guys who are a Federalist Society and this great resume, but it doesn't mean they're advancing conservative values. And in fact, they often aren't. And that's what was happening very clearly on the Court of Criminal Appeals. And they just got exposed last cycle and now this seat. So 4 new people. How many are on the court? I'm embarrassed to have to ask that, but tell me.
There are 9. We elect 3 every 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. So we have 4 new ones come January.
Mm-hmm. We do. And, Kevin Yeary, Judge Yeary is running for re-election, for his 3rd term. Judge Yeary he's been a pretty solid conservative. In fact, he was the lone dissenting vote in the election fraud decision.
So it's 8-1. So in theory, we should have the 4 new ones and Mr. Yeary coming back. So we'll have 5 people who are rational, at least on that issue.
Yeah, and then John Messinger is our place 9 nominee. Because Judge David Newell is not running for re-election.
So we'll have 6 new people.
Yes, correct. Absolutely.
Okay. My mistake. Thank you for correcting that.
Yeah.
So in theory, if that type of issue comes up again, it ought to be 6-3. But we'll see. Every fact is different. Well, Tom, tell the audience where they can learn more about you.
Yeah, you bet. So my website is smithfortexas.org, and that's smithfortexas.org. And then I'm on X at smithfortx. Pretty easy handle to remember. And I've got a couple of Facebook accounts too, and that kind of thing. So I think I ended up with over 100 conservative endorsements that people can check out, and we're going to try to add to that. So we're going to be very active and keep talking about the campaign and talking about also the need to be unified in November, because being a down-ballot judicial race, we've got to have unity. So
absolutely, this is crazy.
Yeah,
150 million against our Senate nominee, and again, so much millions spent against Beau French, and it was Paxton and French and you. It's just what I just kept seeing over from every conservative group that I'm familiar with. Bam, 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 bam. And then the AG was somewhat split, right? Mays was in a lot of them, but that was a little bit. But you 3 were just uniformly got to hit these 3. Okay, how are y'all's campaigns financed? So if somebody want to make a donation, I believe there are caps, but I don't know. Tell me.
They can go to my website and get to. There's a donation link there. There are donation limits. It's $5,000 per individual per election, or $10,000 per couple. And there are some other limits for PACs and law firms and that kind of thing. But so we're a little bit restricted for that. And glad you brought that up, because these have historically been low dollar campaigns, but they do cost money. And any help that we get, I tell people, like, you give me $5,000, it's like giving someone else $50,000, because it helps me so much in terms of being able to run my campaign. So that's much, much appreciated.
Folks, if you're just joining us mid-flow, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have Tom Smith, a good ballot name, the Republican standard bearer for the Court of Criminal Appeals place. What place? Place 3. Yes. Over 700,000 votes. I'm so proud of you. That was very, very strong. I've known Tom a long time. Not really well, but we've worked together for many years and known each other and run in the same circles. So I'm ecstatic that you're the nominee. I think you're going to be a wonderful judge, and we sure appreciate you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Go forth and conquer, friend.
That's what we're going to do. Anthony, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate y'all listening to me. Thanks a lot. We'll see you on the campaign trail.
Yes, sir. All right, folks, if you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we're talking about the exportation of spying, bounties, and secret surveillance by the Chinese government in many nations around the world, to include very much the United States and conspicuously Texas. In fact, about 6 months ago, the governor's office, Governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, issued an alert about Chinese spies operating here in the state of Texas. But before we get to that, I want to take us to the United Kingdom, because it is known that the Chinese government is putting bounties on the heads of Chinese dissidents who have been able to escape that communist nation and go abroad and who speak against the Chinese government. $125,000 plus bounty for capture or presumably the death of these folks. So 2 Chinese men living in London, and they were there as part of the Hong Kong Economic Trade Office. So the nation of Hong Kong, well, I guess arguably not a nation, a free area portion of China, in theory. Of course, now China is locking down Hong Kong, even though they said they wouldn't when the United Kingdom gave it back to them. But nonetheless, Hong Kong and China has trade posts throughout the world. And 2 fellows were living in London, working under the guise of the Hong Kong Economic Trade Office. They went out and they were following and harassing Chinese dissidents who were there in the United Kingdom and trying to help lead the Chinese government away from communism and into some type of a democracy, or just telling the truth about what they were doing, what happened to them in China, right? So I'm kind of stumbling through this, but I want to get it as accurate as I can without overstepping a boundary. But the long and the short of it, they got caught in London, and 2 of them just got convicted here in the last few weeks. And they're the 2 first convicted Chinese spies of the UK history. But what they were doing was shocking. And they, being the Chinese government, has people in the U.S. doing the same thing, and in Texas specifically doing this. They're out there tracking Chinese nationals or people who have left China and taken refuge in the United Kingdom or in the U.S., including Texas, and harassing them and potentially, like the movies, putting a bag on their head, trying to drag them into cars and taking them back. There are straight up bounties on people's lives. There's some of these individuals living in the United States. Anna Kwok, KWOK, was reported as one of them who have bounties on their head from the Chinese government. This was reported in the Wall Street Journal. Francis Hoy, Joey Siu, and Dennis Kwok. You guys might remember not long ago, a similar event was uncovered in New York City, running out of Chinatown, where they were operating, they put up, they being agents, effectively agents of the Chinese government, a fake police station. And they were just regulating the Chinese citizens there in New York. There was also a court in Brooklyn accused a man of establishing the Chinese police station. Right there, just like, we're going to be police officers in this major city that is not part of our country, and we're going to spy on dissidents. We're going to spy on Chinese heritage, people with Chinese heritage, whether you're Americans or a Chinese national living in the U.S. This is the audacity of China as it's growing in power, as it's flexing its muscles militarily, intimidating Taiwan, lied to the United Kingdom, took Hong Kong, said it would not force communism upon that nation. It would keep the markets open. And it's done the exact opposite. It's putting anybody who is pro-democracy and speaks about it in jail, beating protesters, suppressing it, taking away their political rights. This is just a growing cancer on the world. There's no way around it. And if not the other superpower, quickly becoming the other superpower, in the world. We have a real problem that our children are going to have to handle, and probably our grandchildren are going to have to handle. And this isn't unique. It's not happening only in the United Kingdom. This isn't a one-off. It's not happening only in New York City. 6 months ago, Governor Abbott issued an executive order. I've just pulled it up. So let's see. The date on this is November 18, 2024. To protect Texans from coordinated harassment and coercion by the People's Republic of China or the Chinese Communist Party. Governor directed Texas DPS to target and arrest any criminals executing CCP influence operations like Operation Fox Hunt to forcibly return dissidents to China. They're out there trying to grab people in Texas, in Houston, in New York, in the United States, in London, put a bag over their head, drag them into the car, and ship them back to China. Quote, this is Abbott's quote, one of them. The Chinese Communist Party has engaged in a worldwide harassment campaign against Chinese dissidents in attempts to forcibly return them to China. Texas will not tolerate the harassment or coercion of more than 250,000 individuals of Chinese descent who legally call Texas home by the Chinese Communist Party or its heinous proxies. Ensuring the safety, welfare, and well-being of Texans is a top priority. So what's happening, and why is this happening, and why are we, as not just Texans but Americans, letting the Chinese do this in our state, in our nation? How are effectively foreign spies walking Texas streets, intimidating people here, putting bounties on Americans' heads who have, quote-unquote, the audacity to speak up about freedom? The audacity to speak about COVID, right? There's the greatest abuse of the last 5 years. These guys, the Chinese government, very clearly gave the entire world COVID and then burned down the lab, refused to allow anybody to investigate, anybody from around the world, the UN, NATO, you pick it, thumb their nose at it, and it's largely gone by. This destroyed so many lives, killed so many people unnecessarily, and put so many nations and states into economic depression. What are we doing allowing the Chinese government to run amok and do as they choose? So we've had a problem in Texas since at least 2020 with the Chinese government harassing, spying on, or illegally conducting activities in Texas. Going back to July of 2020, then Senator Marco Rubio, who was chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said that the Chinese consulate in Houston was a major intelligence gathering operation. In fact, it was ordered to shut down. The U.S. government said, you can't have your consulate open any longer in Houston to the Chinese government because it was such a perceived spy network and intimidation and not a consulate, acting as intelligence gathering. And who knows, China is strongly believed by most nations to be stealing technology and stealing Bitcoin and hacking and spying and pick it. It seems to be it being the Chinese government seems to be advancing these. So that was 2020. You guys will remember on the previous shows we've talked about the spies who were actually captured, the Chinese spies who were captured in Houston, and then they had the audacity to run effectively a police station in Houston that is out there spying on, browbeating, intimidating folks who are speaking against the Chinese government. They're just they being the Chinese government, is trying to silence the entire world. And they've been pretty effective at it, frankly. The UN has kowtowed to them. NATO has largely kowtowed to them. We have a problem, right? We who believe in liberty and freedom and the republic that is the United States, we have a problem with a growing threat of the Chinese party. There's no way around it. CCP. It is growing. It is pervasive, and it's here. They're operating spies and clandestine police stations throughout major cities, including in Texas. So much so that the governor 6 months ago had to issue an executive order telling DPS to start shutting them down. I mean, why is that not on the lead of the news? Seriously, why is it this show and just a handful of other outlets talking about it, yet if you got a 6-year-old boy trying to compete in girls' sports, front and center, and the mom and the dad and the child, I'm really Sarah, and you don't understand, I'm trapped in the wrong body. Like, this is all over the news. They're just crucifying our values, those that are, they being the news, crucifying our values, while the Chinese government tries to crucify the values of democracy. We're getting attacked from every direction, and the Chinese government is at the tip of that spear. The level of theft, it's unknown. We don't even know it. But the stuff that we know about, technological theft, is jaw-dropping. There's no way around it. So we're finally, we being the free world, the United Kingdom is less and less the free world. It's really becoming a Islamic-led nation more than anything, and surrendering to that and surrendering their value system. But they did have the decency to stop and convict Chinese spies who are living undercover at the so-called Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office. They caught them 6 months ago or so. They had a full court hearing on it, and hallelujah, they got convicted. But this has been happening in Texas for a number of years. Right now, we're talking about what Marco Rubio said in July of 2020, what the FBI said, and ultimately the governor 6 months ago. But why are we Texans allowing this to happen, or we Americans allowing this to happen without more severe repercussions coming? So that's all we can do this show for China, but we've got to move forward on to another topic. If you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you're following us, politicswithbigdogs.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Once a week, we put out a newsletter. Sure want to engage with you more. All right, folks, we've got to move forward. Many of you have probably seen this, but I want to make sure we give it some time. Mike Pence, former Vice President Mike Pence from the first Trump administration, recently came out and made national news in very deliberate fashion, clearly. He and Karl Rove and, the old school Bush Cornyn crowd out there saying, hey, Republicans have lost their way. And they're saying it as a result of Paxton Republicans overwhelmingly defeating John Cornyn. John Cornyn, of course, has been 24 years in the U.S. Senate, and Rove's out there in Wall Street Journal, and Cornyn was with him with Trump 99% of the time, and this and that. And, well, yeah, maybe, right? Because those are easy votes, but he sure wasn't with conservatives. I'm not even talking about being with Trump. How about John Cornyn being with conservatives? Wasn't with conservatives on expanding entitlements, right? He voted to expand them. Wasn't with conservatives on defending gun rights. He voted to restrict access to guns. No way around it. And what I'm really troubled about is after 24 years in the U.S. Senate, if he's so conservative, or any of them have been there for 20 years as Republicans, why don't we have voter ID in the nation? I'm a little embarrassed to admit I didn't even understand that we didn't. I just assumed that, much like I did assume Texans weren't transitioning genders and of children. I assumed that to vote, you had to have a photo ID. You had to be legal. You had to be registered. You had to be all these things. And for someone to be in the U.S. Senate for 24 years, like John Cornyn has been, and not fix that, certainly he knew it. Like, that is not conservative, period. To watch the deficit grow, to watch the budget grow, to watch the Federal Reserve grow, to just sit and watch Obamacare and all of these really terrible and destructive policies advance into law and into the social fabric of America. I don't see why you have any leg to stand on. But we talked about Cornyn plenty. I don't want to just single him out. I want to talk about Pence and what Mike Pence is saying. Mike Pence is saying out there, hey, I don't know, I'm not supporting Paxton. Okay, so what's that mean? Pence can't vote here. He won't raise money for him, won't donate? Does that mean he's supporting Talarico? Like, this is binary. We're down to two people now. I guess there's a couple fringe candidates, but does that mean Karl Rove and Mike Pence and John Now, remember that guy, the super rich Houston guy who spent $8 million himself, donated $8 million besmirching and attacking Ken Paxton? They're not going to do at least that much to defeat Talarico? I think these guys actually would love for Paxton to lose. He won't, but they would love it. So they could say, see, I told you so. Next time you have to go with us and our moderate guy. I want to know if John Now, a Houston gazillionaire, is going to spend at least $8 million defeating Talarico. Because he just spent $8 million trying to defeat Ken Paxton. Frankly, I bet he spent more, but it was really easy to find the first $8 million. I doubt it. I bet he won't. I bet he won't spend a penny trying to defeat Talarico. And Mike Pence, this, Republican vice president of the United States, thought about running for president of the United States, is out there effectively attacking the Republican who's on the ballot against James Talarico. So what does that mean? What does it mean to use these words, Mike Pence? Republicans have lost their way. I think he's chastising you and I and all of the other voters who delivered 252 out of the 254 counties for Ken Paxton. Well, guess what, Mike? Guess what, Pence? I agree with you. Republicans have lost their way, but for very different reasons. I believe that Washington, D.C. and these Republicans that are all having a party up there, working with Democrats, all wanting to just retain power of incumbency and laughing at the other 300 million plus of us who are out here raising our families, working hard, trying to honor the values that are America. These guys are laughing as they just explode the deficit. Yeah, John Cornyn. Yes, Mike Pence. You guys in control of government that have watched the deficit and the debt explode, you have lost your way. You have lost the Republican way. You guys who oppose the values of our nation, of freedom, of the Second Amendment, of the right to protect yourselves, of smaller government. You're a growing government. Look at the tax code. Nobody can understand it. It's not credible. Nobody can be aware of all of the federal laws that you guys have created. Every day, I suspect all of us break a whole bunch of laws we don't even know exist because of the size and the scope, the massive reach of the federal government. So Mike Pence and John Cornyn, after decades in D.C., if this is Republican leadership, then yes, I agree with you. You have lost your way. In Texas, we've got a bunch of that same thing happening. We talked all about the effort by Republicans to defend foreign truck drivers who hurt people, to change the law to benefit them. Really, I think it's to benefit the insurance companies. We've talked a lot in the past about big business versus free enterprise. Texas has become a bastion for big business. If you're $1 billion owner of a company and you can write a $5 million check to our elected officials, then you get to dictate an awful lot about policy. Well, that's very different than free enterprise. Free enterprise means that we're making sure that government is not restricting and putting up barriers to entry in the marketplace for you and me and every other little guy out there. That's free enterprise, creating a level field of opportunity. It doesn't mean you're getting a handout. You got to go out there and have a product or a service that the marketplace wants and be able to deliver it. There's a lot of execution in that. That's vastly different than creating a legislative regime that favors an industry. Why? Because they've made a big old donation to some elected official in Texas. And there's a lot of that. There's an awful lot of that. The 30 largest donors in Texas, I suspect, are responsible for about 70% of the political contributions. I mean, it's just staggering. So Mike Pence and John Cornyn and the rest of you in Washington, D.C. who have been there, Mitch McConnell, been there for decades and don't have the decency to ensure that we have voter ID, like some basic fundamental things, I agree with you. You've lost your way. And as a result, people who are frustrated with the deficit, are frustrated with the open borders, that 2 terms of President Bush, 2 terms of Obama, 1 term of President Bush 41, all had open borders. Reagan was the only one who really went after him. Oh, you can't do this. The John Cornyns of the world, nobody wants a wall. It's not practical. It won't work. Trying to take our guns, the John Cornyns of the world. It's not John Cornyn. It is the bulk of Washington, D.C. Republicans. You guys have lost your way. And we, the silent yet outraged, frustrated voters on whom's back you guys have had a career, we finally saw an out with Donald Trump. He might actually do something. And he did. I mean, heck, look at border crossings. They just almost zeroed out. The guy delivered. You can attack people like me and listeners of this show, Mike Pence and John Cornyn and Karl Rove, and Cornyn can go out there with his crew and say, hey, there's 18 million Texans who are registered to vote who didn't vote in the runoff. He can come out, didn't vote in the primary and come out in this runoff. That's enticing, 9 or 10 million registered Democrats, encourage them to vote in the runoff, which is still legal because the Karl Roves, the Mike Pences, and the John Cornyns of the Republican Party and Abbott's Secretary of State, handpicked, appointed, is opposed to it and litigating against it. It's just insane. We can't close our primaries. They want and need Democrats. Otherwise, they might have to deliver on these policy issues. And look at Talarico. What is the choice for Talarico? What does he stand for? Well, let's talk about it. James Talarico opposed a bill that banned, so Texas in 2021, that legislative session, 3 sessions ago, offered a bill, ultimately it passed, that said, hey, we're not going to allow biological boys to compete in girls' sports, K through 12 UIL public school sports. You guys might remember it. You probably thought it was already the law, but it turns out a whole bunch of boys who couldn't win at track is against other boys and couldn't win in their swimming and diving competitions that said, I'm identifying as Sarah and I'm going to be on the girls team. And they were taking medals and state championships away from biological girls, right? Our daughters, our nieces. That's just fundamentally wrong and unfair. So Texas passed the bill. Again, shocking that we needed it, but we did. You and I had to rally and basically force Republicans to go pass this bill. Well, Talarico said 100% voted against it and had a very powerful quote. So let's go find it. So let's just get Mr. Talarico in his own words. So here it is, 2021, transgendering of school athletics, kindergarten through 12 in Texas, said it's a non-issue, shouldn't be in there. So I'm looking at Mr. Talarico's face on this video in the halls of the Texas Capitol. And here are his words.
And then in terms of other issues, Governor Abbott has filled this special session agenda with far-right conspiracy theories about trans children causing problems on sports teams, which we know does not occur in the state of Texas, or critical race theory, which we know is not being taught in classrooms in the state of Texas. If we were focused on actual issues, that'd be one thing, but we're not. Greg Abbott didn't even add fixing the power grid to the special session agenda.
Far-right conspiracy theories about trans children causing problems on Texas sport teams, which we quote I'm sorry, I had to botch that quote. But you heard it, which we know does not occur in Texas. Of course, we know that's false, right? Just period. That's why we outlawed it. One conspicuous example was a girl who, I think she was 14 or 15. This was before, when it was still legal for children, those under the age of 18 in Texas, to transition from one gender to another. She was transitioning to a boy and taking testosterone and all sorts of chemical blockers and enhancements to make her body stronger and more like a boy's than a girl's. And she was a wrestler, ended up winning the state wrestling championship, right? So we have a lot of examples of these. We have the very famous one of the collegiate guy. Now, that wasn't in Texas, but he couldn't win in swimming. He decided he was a girl, and he got to go and compete in women's sports. I believe he won an NCAA swimming championship. So that swimmer's, 6'1", born a guy, period, grew up in Austin, Texas, competed at Westlake, which was a very serious, swimming high school. Good high school in West Austin, well known for football, well known for swimming and hardcore sports. Leah Thomas now goes to Penn, so leaves the state of Texas after competing as a boy, decides that he's a she, gets on hormone blockers and other, now is a developed male who is in college, and then decides he's really a female or identifies as a female, and ends up winning in 2022 the national NCAA championship in the 500 yard freestyle swim. So that was a first place victory that some woman, young lady actually, collegiate gal who worked her entire life to get there, should have won. And this man, who then decided he was a female, came from Texas and of course Austin, Texas, right? Like the land of crazy. But this is not uncommon. So James Talarico said, this is not an issue. This is not illegal, should not be illegal in Texas, and voted against it. I mean, that's who Mike Pence is advocating for when he is opposing Ken Paxton, because we're down to a binary choice, A or B. That is who the John Nows of Texas are advancing when they're not supporting Ken Paxton. If you're going to not support Ken Paxton, then you are supporting James Talarico. And when you've done all this harm, $8 million worth of harm, John Now, or the efforts by Karl Rove, who said he, in print, I was doing fundraising for John Cornyn. You've raised all this money to attack Ken Paxton. Now at least do that much to attack Talarico, because this is a guy who says, I'm going to vote against it. We should not ban little boys participating in girls K through 12 sports. That's who we're talking about here, guys. And that's who Pence and Cornyn and the John Nows of the world and the other people opposing Ken Paxton, that's who they're advocating for. Whether they mean to or not, that is the truth and the practice. So yes, I agree with you, Mike Pence. Republicans have lost their way, and they've done it by implicitly or perhaps explicitly picking up the James Talaricos of the world. I think they'd rather say, see, I told you, than keep him out of the Senate. And of course, James Talarico, who these folks are potentially lifting up to be a U.S. Senator. I don't think he'll win because he's too crazy. The swing voters of Texas are never going to support him for example, that opposing the ban of letting boys compete with girls. Or he also said, we need to allow children to sexually transition, right? Not only did he say, outside of my family, what are the things that I love? Trans children. But when voting against the bill to stop children from being sexually transitioned in our state, Talarico said, this is wrong. It's not child abuse to sexually transition a child, and I oppose the bill. Didn't put an age limit on it. Didn't say, if they're over 15. None of that. He just straight up opposed the bill. And prior to this, we know, you and I, because we had to go and fight to ban it, Texas doctors and hospitals in Texas were actively transitioning children of all ages. What? Suddenly a 8-year-old little boy identifies as a girl, they're putting on hormone blockers. A 13-year-old girl identifies with as a boy, they're surgically modifying their body. You can't undo these. Yet this is what was happening in Texas, even though Republicans had controlled Texas for 20-plus years. So, yes, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Pence, and others, the Republicans lost their way. And you and I, dear listener, an advocate for liberty and advocates for freedom, are helping the party and helping those governing our state find their way once again. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Thank you so much for fighting for liberty. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's go forth and conquer. Conservative values will overcome. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.